Sometimes life strips away everything you thought you had, leaving you standing in the ruins, wondering how you'll protect the one person who matters most. Noah Carter knew that feeling all too well as he stared at the sagging porch of his uncle's farmhouse, his 8-year-old daughter Ellie clutching his hand. The whole town called the place worthless. The roof leaked, the foundation cracked, and his ex-wife's parents had made it clear what they thought of him dragging their granddaughter to that rotting shack. Noah was a single father with empty pockets and nowhere else to go. This crumbling house in rural Kentucky was his last chance. He figured he'd fix what he could and maybe give Ellie a place to call home. What he didn't know was that his eccentric uncle had hidden something extraordinary in the bones of that old house. As Noah began tearing away rotted boards, he discovered maps, keys, and secrets that would change everything. But would anyone believe that this forgotten farmhouse held the key to a fortune worth $150 million? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The gravel road to the farmhouse seemed to stretch longer with each pothole that rattled Noah's aging pickup truck. In the passenger seat, Ellie pressed her face against the window, watching the Kentucky countryside roll past in shades of autumn gold and rust. Her small backpack sat between them, containing everything she'd deemed essential for their new life. 3 books, a worn stuffed rabbit named Mr. Hops, and a framed photo of her and Noah from last Christmas. "Daddy, are we really going to live here?" she asked, her voice carrying that particular mixture of excitement and uncertainty that 8-year-olds possessed when facing the unknown. Noah glanced at her in the rearview mirror of his heart, this brave little girl, who'd never once complained about their circumstances, who'd packed her few belongings, without question, when he'd explained they had to leave their apartment. "We're going to try, sweetheart. Uncle Samuel left us this place, and maybe we can make something good out of it." The farmhouse appeared around a bend, like a tired old man settling into his chair. Noah's first glimpse stole his breath, but not in the way he'd hoped. The 2-story structure leaned slightly to the left, as if the weight of years had finally become too much to bear upright. Grey paint peeled from the clapboard, siding in long strips that flapped in the October breeze like surrender flags. The wraparound porch sagged at both ends, supported by posts that looked more like toothpicks than proper columns. Weeds had claimed the front yard with the enthusiasm of conquerors, rising waist-high around rusted farm equipment that seemed to emerge from the earth like the bones of prehistoric creatures. A barn stood behind the house, its red paint faded to the color of dried blood, one door hanging askew on broken hinges. Noah pulled to a stop beside what might have once been a flower garden and now resembled a small jungle. He sat for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, fighting the urge to put the truck in reverse and drive until the gas ran out. "It looks like the house from that movie," Ellie said, unbuckling her seatbelt. "The one where the family moves to the scary house, but then they fix it up and it becomes beautiful." Her optimism was a gift he didn't deserve. Noah managed to smile. "You're right. Houses just need love, don't they?" The inheritance letter from the lawyer's office lay folded in his shirt pocket, the edges soft from handling. 3 months ago, when it had arrived at their cramped apartment in Louisville, Noah had stared at it in disbelief. Samuel Carteris, father's brother, a man he'd met perhaps 5 times in his 34 years, had died and left him property. The lawyer had been apologetic about the condition of the place, warning that it might be more burden than blessing. Now, standing in the overgrown driveway with his daughter's hand in his, Noah understood what the lawyer had meant. The front steps creaked ominously under their weight. Noah pulled the heavy key from his pocket, an old-fashioned brass thing that looked like it belonged in a museum, and worked it into the lock. The door opened with a groan that seemed to echo through the house's bones. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of afternoon sunlight that filtered through grimy windows. The smell hit them immediately, mustiness layered with something else, something that spoke of a life interrupted rather than concluded. Pine wood and old leather, coffee grounds and pipe tobacco, lingering essence of a man who'd lived alone but not lonely. The living room stretched before them, furnished with pieces that had clearly been chosen for comfort rather than style. A worn leather armchair sat beside a stone fireplace, positioned to catch the morning light from the east window. Bookshelves lined one entire wall, packed with volumes on subjects ranging from geology to philosophy, their spines faded but cared for. "Look, Daddy." Ellie had discovered a collection of rocks displayed on the mantelpiece, not ordinary stones, but specimens that caught the light and threw it back in unexpected ways. Geodes split to reveal crystal hearts, smooth river stones with veins of quartz, and what appeared to be fossils embedded in sedimentary layers. Noah picked up one of the stones, surprised by its weight. A small card beneath it read, "Limestone, with calcite veins North 40, spring of 97. Each specimen had a similar notation, location and date, recorded in precise handwriting. The kitchen revealed more of Samuel's methodical nature. Canning jars lined the pantry shelves, their contents long since spoiled but their labels intact. Tomatoes, 2019. Green beans, July 2019. Applesauce, October 2018. A man who'd planned for winters, who'd understood the value of preparation and patience. But it was when Noah opened the back door that he truly began to understand who his uncle had been. The workshop occupied what had once been a screened porch, its windows now glassed in for year-round use. Hand tools hung from pegboard walls, with the precision of a surgeon's instruments, each chisel plain and saw in its designated place. The workbench, built from what appeared to be a single massive oak slab, bore the gentle scars of decades of careful work. Noah ran his fingers along the bench's surface, feeling the slight depressions worn by countless projects. These weren't the tools of a hobbyist, but of a master craftsman. Wood shavings curled in corners, and the scent of linseed oil still hung in the air. On a shelf above the bench sat a collection of small wooden boxes, each one a work of art. Dovetail joints fit with the precision of puzzle pieces, finishes that glowed with hand-rubbed warmth. Your uncle was quite the craftsman. Noah turned to find a woman standing in the doorway, Asian features, early 40s, with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore jeans and a flannel shirt, work boots that had seen actual work. "I'm sorry," Noah said, stepping protectively closer to Ellie. "I didn't hear you come in." "Sarah Chen," she said, extending a calloused hand. "I'm the librarian in town, but I also helped Samuel with some of his research projects. I saw your truck and thought I'd introduce myself." Her handshake was firm, direct. "You must be Noah. Samuel talked about you." "He did?" Noah couldn't hide his surprise. "I barely knew him." Sarah's smile carried a hint of sadness. "He knew more about you than you might think. Said you were the only one in the family who'd inherited the Carter. Stubbornness meant it as a compliment." She looked around the workshop with obvious affection. "He spent hours out here, especially these last few years, always working on some project, always measuring and calculating." Ellie had discovered a child-sized stool tucked under the workbench, its surface worn smooth by small hands. "Did Uncle Samuel have kids?" she asked. "No, sweetheart," Sarah said gently, "but he hoped someday he might have family visit who'd appreciate his work. Looks like he was right." She turned to Noah. "Are you planning to stay?" The question carried weight beyond its simple words. Noah looked around the workshop, at the tools that represented a lifetime of patient craftsmanship, at his daughter already making herself at home on Samuel's stool. "We don't have anywhere else to go," he said, the honesty surprising him. Sarah nodded as if she'd expected that answer. Samuel left detailed notes about the property, maintenance schedules, repair priorities, even instructions for the vegetable garden. Said whoever inherited the place would need guidance. She paused, studying Noah's face. He also left some interesting research materials. Documents about the land, geological surveys, water table measurements might be worth looking at, especially if you're planning to make this work long-term. Before Noah could ask what she meant, The sound of vehicles on gravel announced visitors. Through the kitchen window, he watched two luxury SUVs park behind his battered pickup. His heart sank as he recognized the occupants. Margaret and Robert Whitman emerged from the first vehicle with the careful dignity of people accustomed to being important. Noah's former in-laws had dressed for the occasion, Margaret in a tailored coat that probably cost more than Noah made in a month. Robert in the kind of casual wear that screamed expensive brands. Behind them came their daughter Jessica, Noah's ex-wife, her lawyer's briefcase suggesting this wasn't a social call. "Daddy?" Ellie had noticed them too, her voice small. "It's okay, baby," Noah said, though his gut told him otherwise. The confrontation began before they'd even reached the porch. Margaret's voice carried through the open windows, pitched loud enough to ensure neighbors blocks away could hear. "This is what you call suitable housing for our granddaughter. Robert, look at this place. It's barely standing." Noah met them at the front door, Sarah beside him in a gesture of quiet support. Margaret's gaze swept over the farmhouse's weathered exterior with the disdain of someone appraising condemned property. "Hello, Margaret, Robert." Noah kept his voice level. "Jessica." His ex-wife had the grace to look uncomfortable, but her mother showed no such restraint. "Noah, we've tried to be patient," Margaret began, "but this is beyond reason. You cannot seriously intend to raise Ellie in this." She gestured dismissively at the house. "This ruin." "It's our home now," Noah said simply. Robert stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to getting his way. "We've consulted with attorneys, Noah. Given the circumstances, your financial situation, the condition of this property, we have grounds to petition for custody. Ellie deserves stability." The words hit like physical blows. Noah felt Sarah's presence beside him, steady and reassuring, but his focus narrowed to his ex-in-law's faces. "Ellie is my daughter, and she's our granddaughter." Margaret snapped. "Look around you, Noah. The roof is falling in, there's no proper heating, and you're hours from decent schools. What kind of future can you give her here?" Jessica finally spoke, her voice softer but no less cutting. "Noah, be reasonable. Mom and Dad have offered to help. Ellie could have her own room, go to private school, have opportunities." "She has opportunities with me." "Like what?" Margaret's laugh was sharp. "Learning to live in poverty? Watching her father fail at another desperate scheme?" The words stung because they carried echoes of Noah's own fears. But before he could respond, Ellie appeared beside him, her small hand slipping into his. "I like it here," she said, her 8-year-old voice clear and certain. "Uncle Samuel left us treasures." Margaret's expression softened when she looked at her granddaughter, but her resolve didn't waver. "Sweetheart, you haven't seen what a real home looks like yet. Grammy and Grandpa have a beautiful house with a swimming pool and your own playroom." "I want to stay with Daddy," Ellie said firmly. The silence that followed carried the weight of unspoken threats. Finally, Robert reached into his coat and pulled out a business card. "Our attorney will be in touch," he said, pressing it into Noah's hand. "We hope you'll see reason before this becomes unpleasant." They left as abruptly as they'd arrived, their expensive vehicles disappearing down the gravel road in clouds of dust that seemed to linger like accusations. Sarah remained after they'd gone, her presence a quiet comfort in the aftermath of confrontation. "How much time do you think I have?" Noah asked. "Before they file papers." "Maybe a week, 2 at most." Sarah's voice was matter-of-fact. "But Noah, there's something you should know about this place. About why Samuel left it to you specifically." She walked to the living room window, looking out at the overgrown land that stretched toward the tree line. Samuel wasn't just a craftsman. He was a geologist, self-taught but brilliant. He spent 20 years studying this land, mapping underground formations, testing water sources. All those rock specimens, all those careful notes, they weren't just a hobby. Noah joined her at the window. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Samuel believed this land held something valuable, something worth fighting for." Sarah turned to face him. "He left boxes of research in the library basement. Maps, surveys, water analysis reports. He made me promise that if anything happened to him, I'd make sure the right person saw them." "And you think I'm the right person?" Sarah's smile was enigmatic, Samuel did. Said the carter's stubbornness might finally serve a useful purpose. She moved toward the door, then paused. Noah, don't let them intimidate you. This place, it's worth more than they know, more than anyone knows. After she left, Noah and Ellie stood in the gathering dusk of their new home. The farmhouse creaked around them, settling into evening like an old man easing into familiar clothes. Somewhere in the walls, mice scurried. The refrigerator hummed with the irregular rhythm of machinery held together by habit rather than engineering. But there was something else in the silence here, a sense of potential, of secrets waiting to be discovered. Noah thought about Samuel's workshop, about the careful precision of those tools, about the rock specimens labeled with dates and locations spanning decades. "Daddy," Ellie tugged at his hand, "are we really going to stay?" Noah looked down at his daughter, this brave little girl who'd already lost so much and faced it with such grace. In her eyes, he saw not fear but adventure, not desperation but hope. "Yes, sweetheart," he said, the decision surprising him with its certainty. "We're going to stay. We're going to fix this place up, and we're going to make it home." As if in response to his words, the old house seemed to exhale around the long, slow breath that spoke of patience rewarded and purposes about to unfold. 3 days into their new life, Noah stood in the kitchen, holding a sledgehammer and questioning every decision that had brought him to this moment. The wall between the kitchen and what Samuel had used as a study showed clear signs of water-damaged brown stains that spread like old bruises across the faded wallpaper. If he was going to make this house livable for Ellie, the wall had to come down. "Stand back, sweetheart," he called to his daughter, who was sorting through Samuel's book collection in the living room. "Daddy's about to make some noise." The first swing sent vibrations through his arms and released a shower of plaster dust. The second opened a hole large enough to peer through. Noah expected to find standard wall construction studs and insulation, maybe some evidence of the leak that had caused the damage. Instead, he found an envelope. It was tucked between the studs in a plastic bag, protected from moisture and time. Noah's hands trembled slightly as he worked it free. The envelope bore his name in Samuel's careful handwriting, along with a date from 6 months ago, long before Samuel's death, as if he'd known Noah would eventually stand in this exact spot, sledgehammer in hand. Inside was a single sheet of paper and what appeared to be a professional geological survey. The letterhead read, "Kentucky Geological Survey," and was signed by Dr. Marcus Webb, state geologist. Noah's eyes skimmed the technical language, catching fragments that made his pulse quicken. Significant aquifer, exceptional purity, estimated flow rate, and at the bottom, a handwritten note that made him sink into Samuel's kitchen chair. "Mr. Carter, your land sits atop one of the most significant freshwater reserves I've documented in 30 years of geological work. The water table extends approximately 300 feet below surface, with mineral content suggesting natural filtration through limestone formations. Conservative estimates suggest this aquifer could supply clean water to a community of 50 people indefinitely. I strongly recommend further testing. This discovery could be extraordinarily valuable." The letter that accompanied the survey was in Samuel's handwriting, dated just weeks before his death. "Noah, if you're reading this, then you've started the work I always hoped you would. I've watched you from afar, son. Watched you struggle and fight and never give up, especially when it came to that little girl of yours. The Carter stubbornness runs deep in you, and for once, that's exactly what this situation needs. I bought this land 40 years ago because something about it called to me. Took me 20 years to understand what that something was. This house sits on water, Noah. Not just any water, pure, clean, life-giving water that could change everything for a lot of people, but there are folks who'd rather see it bottled and sold than used for the good it could do. I'm leaving this place to you because I believe you're the kind of man who'll do right by it. The surveys are just the beginning. There's more to find, more to understand. Sarah Chen at the library has been helping me research the legal aspects. She's good people, and she knows more than she lets on. Don't let them scare you off, son. What's under this ground is worth fighting for. Noah read the letter 3 times before the words fully penetrated. He looked around the modest kitchenette, the cracked linoleum, the ancient appliances, the water stains that had led to this discovery, and tried to reconcile it with the scientific language of the geological survey. His phone rang, interrupting his stunned contemplation. The caller ID showed his ex-wife's number. Jessica. "Noah, we need to talk." Her voice carried a tension he recognized from their marriage's final months. "My parents' attorney wants to schedule a meeting. They're filing for emergency custody unless you agree to reasonable living arrangements for Ellie." "Emergency custody?" Noah gripped the phone tighter. "On what grounds?" "They drove by the house yesterday. The roof has holes, Noah. The front steps are rotting. They have photos." Noah looked through the kitchen window at the barn, where part of the roof had indeed collapsed during the previous night's rain. "Jessica, I'm fixing the place up. It just takes time." "Time we don't have. They're saying you're endangering Ellie by keeping her in a structure that's not fit for habitation." Jessica's voice softened slightly. "Noah, I don't want this fight, but they're not wrong about the condition of that house. Give me 2 weeks." "They won't wait 2 weeks. They're talking about filing papers tomorrow." A pause. "Noah, maybe you should consider their offer. Ellie could stay with them during the week, visit you on weekends, at least until you get the house in better shape." The suggestion hit like a physical blow. Weekends. He'd become a weekend father to his own daughter, the kind of arrangement that slowly eroded the bond between parent and child until visits became obligation rather than joy. "No." The word came out harder than he'd intended. "Ellie stays with me." "Then you better figure out how to make that house safe, fast." After Jessica hung up, Noah sat in the silence of Samuel's kitchen, the geological survey spread before him like a treasure map. Outside, Ellie's laughter drifted through the window as she chased a butterfly through the overgrown yard. The sound was pure joy, untainted by custody battles or geological surveys or the weight of impossible decisions. He thought about the Whitman's attorney, about emergency custody petitions and photographs of roof damage. Then he looked again at Dr. Webb's assessment. Extraordinarily valuable. If the water under his land was as significant as the survey suggested, it changed everything. But Noah was a carpenter, not a geologist. He understood wood and nails and the satisfaction of building something solid with his hands. Water tables and aquifers and mineral content were beyond his expertise. He needed help. Sarah Chen answered her cell phone on the second ring. "I was wondering when you'd call." "You knew about the survey. Samuel made me promise not to say anything unless you found it yourself. He was very specific about that." Her voice carried a mixture of relief and anticipation. "Where did you find it?" "In the kitchen wall." "Sarah, is this real? Could there really be water under here worth—" He glanced at the survey again. "Worth what this suggests." Samuel was brilliant, Noah. Self-taught, but he understood geology better than most people with degrees. And he was careful every measurement verified, every test repeated. If Dr. Webb confirmed Samuel's findings, then yes, it's real. Noah walked to the window, watching Ellie explore the yard with the fearless curiosity of childhood. "The Whitmans are filing for custody. They say the house isn't safe." "When?" "Tomorrow, maybe the day after." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "Noah, there's something else you should know. Samuel wasn't the only one interested in this land. About 6 months ago, representatives from a development company came around asking questions. They wanted to buy properties in this area for what they called agricultural development. Samuel refused to meet with them." "What kind of development company?" "The kind that bottles water and sells it to the highest bidder. The kind that would drain an aquifer dry if it meant profit." Sarah's voice hardened. Samuel believed this water was meant to serve the community, not corporate interests. That's why he spent so much time researching water rights and environmental protection laws. Through the window, Noah watched his daughter discover something in the tall grass, probably another of Samuel's rock specimens. Her delighted cry of, "Daddy, look," carried across the yard. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Always." If I fight this, the custody battle, trying to save this place, protecting whatever's under the ground, what are my chances? The pause stretched long enough that Noah wondered if the call had dropped. Against the Whitmans and their money? Against a development company with lawyers and political connections? Honestly? Sarah's voice was gentle but direct. Not good. Unless. Unless what? Unless you're willing to fight smarter than they expect. Samuel left more than just that survey, Noah. He left a plan. That evening, after Ellie had fallen asleep in what was now her bedroom, Samuel's former study, which Noah had hastily converted with an air mattress and some of her favorite books, Noah sat in his uncle's workshop among the carefully arranged tools. The geological survey lay on the workbench, illuminated by the warm glow of an old desk lamp. He thought about his conversation with Sarah, about Samuel's plan that she'd promised to show him tomorrow. He thought about the Whitman's attorney and emergency custody hearings and his daughter's trusting smile when she'd kissed him goodnight. Most of all, he thought about the water flowing somewhere beneath his feet, clean, pure water that could change lives if it fell into the right hands, or disappear into corporate profit if it didn't. Noah picked up one of Samuel's chisels, feeling its perfect balance in his hand. His uncle had been a craftsman who understood that the best work required patience, precision, and the courage to see a project through to completion. Tomorrow, Noah would begin to understand what Samuel had really left him. Tonight, he would plan. The old farmhouse settled around him with its familiar creaks and sighs, and somewhere in those sounds, Noah heard something new, not the groaning of a structure ready to collapse, but the whisper of secrets ready to be revealed. The next morning brought Sarah Chen to Noah's doorstep before he'd finished his first cup of coffee. She carried a leather satchel that looked as old as the farmhouse itself and wore the expression of someone who'd spent the night planning strategy. "Ellie's still sleeping?" she asked, glancing toward the stairs. "Like a rock. She's been exploring so much, she's worn herself out." Noah led her to the kitchen table, where the geological survey still lay spread like evidence of a crime. "You said Samuel left a plan." Sarah opened the satchel and withdrew a collection of hand-drawn maps that made Noah's breath catch. These weren't the rough sketches of an amateur, but the precise work of someone who understood both artistry and science. Property lines were marked in blue ink, elevation changes shown with careful shading, and throughout it all, flowing like veins through the landscape, were thin red lines that seemed to pulse with life. "Water flow patterns," Sarah explained, tracing one of the red lines with her finger. "Samuel spent 15 years mapping every spring, every seasonal stream, every place where water came to the surface on this property and the surrounding land." The main map showed not just Noah's inherited property, but the entire watershed, hundreds of acres, stretching from the ridgeline down to the valley where the town of Cedar Falls had grown up around what was once a mill pond. The red lines converged beneath Noah's farmhouse like tributaries flowing toward a great river. He was tracking the source, Noah said, understanding beginning to dawn. "More than that, look at these dates," Sarah pointed to small notations along the water lines. Some went back 20 years, others were as recent as last spring. Samuel was documenting seasonal variations, rainfall patterns, even changes in mineral content based on the time of year. A second map showed something that made Noah's heart race. Property ownership boundaries were overlaid on the water flow patterns, and it became clear that while several landowners sat above the aquifer, Noah's property was positioned at what appeared to be the primary recharge point, where surface water entered the underground system. "This is why they want the land," Sarah said quietly. "Whoever controls the recharge point controls access to the entire aquifer." Noah studied the maps, seeing his uncle's vision take shape. Samuel wasn't just a rock collector, he was documenting water rights. Kentucky water law is complicated, but Samuel understood it better than most lawyers. Surface water belongs to whoever owns the land where it flows. But groundwater, especially when it crosses property lines, that's different. The person who can prove they're protecting the source, who's acting as a responsible steward, has significant legal standing. She pulled out a third map, this one showing projected development patterns. Corporate logos were sketched in the margins, companies Noah didn't recognize, but whose names suggested big money and bigger appetites. Samuel believed they'd been planning this for years. Buy up properties one by one, drill extraction wells, and turn the aquifer into a commercial water source. A few landowners make quick money, the companies make massive profits, and in 20 years the aquifer is depleted. Noah thought about Dr. Webb's assessment that the water could supply 50 people indefinitely, unless someone protects it, unless someone fights for it. Sarah's eyes met his. Samuel chose you because he believed you'd fight. The sound of small feet on the stairs announced Ellie's arrival. She appeared in the kitchen wearing yesterday's clothes and sporting hair that defied gravity, but her smile was bright enough to power the house. "Good morning, Miss Sarah," she said with the careful politeness Noah had taught her. "Are you looking at Daddy's treasure maps?" Sarah's expression softened. "Something like that, sweetheart. Your Uncle Samuel was very good at finding hidden treasures." While Ellie ate breakfast, Sarah showed Noah the most detailed of Samuel's maps, a cross-section view that revealed the underground structure like a cave system made of water. The aquifer stretched deep into the earth, held in place by layers of limestone and shale that had taken millions of years to form. "The geology is perfect," Sarah explained. "Natural filtration through limestone, protection from surface contamination, and a recharge rate that's sustainable indefinitely as long as the extraction doesn't exceed the inflow." "How do you know so much about this?" Noah asked. Sarah hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. "I have a master's degree in environmental geology from the University of Kentucky. I came to Cedar Falls 12 years ago to work for the State Geological Survey, but I got tired of watching good science get buried under political pressure. The library job was supposed to be temporary. But you stayed." "I stayed because Samuel convinced me that sometimes the most important work happens quietly, away from committees and bureaucrats." She folded the maps carefully. He was preparing for this fight long before he got sick. He knew he wouldn't live to see it through, but he believed the right person would come along. Noah's phone buzzed with a text message from Jessica. "Attorney meeting moved to this afternoon, 2 p.m. at their office. They want to discuss settlement." He showed the message to Sarah, who frowned. "Settlement means they're hoping to avoid court. That's good, it gives us time." "Time for what?" "To prove you're not just a desperate father trying to make a condemned house habitable. To prove you're a responsible landowner protecting a valuable natural resource." Sarah gathered the maps. "Samuel left detailed instructions, Noah. Not just about the water, but about how to fight for it legally." They spent the next hour going through Samuel's research. Hidden in boxes throughout the house were property surveys going back to the original land grants, historical documents about water usage in the area, and correspondence with environmental lawyers who specialized in groundwater protection. Most importantly, Samuel had begun the process of having the aquifer designated as a protected watershed. The paperwork was incomplete. He'd died before filing the final documents, but the groundwork was solid. "If we can prove the aquifer deserves protection and that you're the right person to protect it, it changes everything," Sarah explained. "You're not just a broke single father living in a deteriorating house. You're the steward of a natural resource worth millions." Noah looked around the kitchen where he'd made this discovery, at the water-stained walls that had hidden the first piece of the puzzle. "What do I need to do?" "First, we finish Samuel's application for watershed protection. I can help with the technical aspects. Second, we document your commitment to the property, show that you're making real improvements, that this isn't just a desperate attempt to avoid losing custody. And third," Sarah's smile was sharp, "we make sure certain interested parties understand that this aquifer isn't for sale." That afternoon, while Ellie played in the yard under Sarah's watchful eye, Noah drove to town for the meeting with the Whitman's attorney. The law office occupied a restored Victorian house on Main Street, all polished wood and expensive furniture, designed to impress and intimidate. Robert Whitman rose from a leather chair as Noah entered, his handshake brief and cold. Margaret remained seated, her expression suggesting she'd smelled something unpleasant. The attorney, a thin man named Harrison, who wore his authority like expensive cologne, gestured Noah to a chair, facing them across a mahogany conference table. "Let's dispense with pleasantries," Harrison began. "My clients are concerned about their granddaughter's welfare. The property you've taken her to is, frankly, uninhabitable. I'm making improvements. Cosmetic repairs to a fundamentally unsound structure." Harrison opened a file folder and spread photographs across the table. They showed the farmhouse's worst angles: the sagging porch, the damaged roof, the overgrown yard that looked more like abandoned land than a home. Margaret leaned forward. "Noah, look at these pictures. Really look at them. Is this where you want Ellie to grow up?" The photographs stung because they weren't inaccurate. The farmhouse did look rough, especially compared to the Whitmans' manicured suburban home with its swimming pool and professionally landscaped yard. But they didn't show Ellie's delight in discovering Samuel's rock collection, or the way she'd claimed the workshop stool as her own special place, or the careful way she'd arranged her few belongings in what she now called my room. "The house has good bones," Noah said. "It just needs work." "Work you can't afford," Robert stated flatly. "We've looked into your finances, Noah. You're 3 months behind on credit card payments, you have no steady income, and your truck has been repossessed twice." Harrison leaned back in his chair. "However, my clients are prepared to be reasonable. They're offering a compromise that serves everyone's interests." He slid a document across the table. Noah scanned the legal language, his heart sinking with each paragraph. "Temporary custody," Harrison explained. "Ellie would live with the Whitmans during the school, year stable housing, excellent educational opportunities, proper medical care. You'd have liberal visitation rights, and if you can demonstrate financial stability and suitable housing within 2 years, we'd revisit the arrangement." 2 years. By then, Ellie would be 10 years old, settled into a routine that didn't include daily time with her father. The Whitmans would become her primary family, and Noah would become the weekend visitor in his daughter's life. "And if I refuse?" Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. "Then we file for permanent custody on grounds of endangerment and neglect. Noah, we don't want to destroy you. We want what's best for Ellie." Noah thought about Samuel's maps, about the water flowing beneath his feet, about the plans Sarah had promised to help him execute. He thought about his daughter's trust and his uncle's faith in the Carter stubbornness. "I need time to consider this." 24 hours, Harrison said. "After that, we proceed with filing." Noah left the law office feeling like he'd been in a boxing match with opponents who outweighed him by 50 pounds each. But as he drove back to the farmhouse, something Sarah had said earlier echoed in his mind. "You're not just a broke single father living in a deteriorating house. You're the steward of a natural resource worth millions." The question was whether he could prove it in 24 hours. When he arrived home, he found Ellie and Sarah in the workshop, where his daughter was carefully arranging Samuel's smallest tools on the child-sized workbench. She looked up as he entered, her face bright with the kind of pure happiness that came from feeling truly at home. "Daddy, Miss Sarah showed me how Uncle Samuel marked all his special rocks. Want to see?" Looking at his daughter's joy, Noah made his decision. Some things were worth fighting for, even against impossible odds. The discovery in Samuel's attic came at dawn, when Noah couldn't sleep and decided to tackle the house's most neglected spaces. He'd been working by flashlight, clearing away decades of accumulated boxes and forgotten furniture, when his beam caught something that didn't belong among the dust and cobwebs. It was a surveyor's transiton antique brass instrument that looked like a small telescope mounted on a tripod. But this wasn't some garage sale find or nostalgic decoration. The brass gleamed with the patina of use, and the precision of its construction spoke of serious professional equipment. Noah lifted it carefully, surprised by its weight and the smoothness of its moving parts. Everything about the instrument suggested it had been maintained with the same care Samuel had shown his woodworking tools. A leather case beside it contained additional eyepieces, measuring chains, and what appeared to be field notebooks filled with calculations and sketches. "You found it," Sarah's voice came from behind him. She'd arrived early, as had become her habit, bringing coffee and the kind of quiet determination that made impossible tasks seem merely difficult. "Found what exactly?" "Samuel's transit. He bought it from a retiring surveyor 30 years ago. Taught himself to use it by measuring every inch of this property." Sarah climbed the attic steps, moving carefully around the accumulated clutter. He was completely self-trained, but his measurements were as accurate as any professional survey. Noah opened one of the field notebooks, squinting at Samuel's precise handwriting in the dim light. The pages were filled with elevation readings, compass bearings, and sketches that showed the property from every conceivable angle. Why would he need this level of detail? Because he was building a legal case. Sarah pointed to a series of calculations that covered an entire page. Water rights in Kentucky depend on proving beneficial use and reasonable stewardship. Samuel was documenting everything where water entered the property, how it moved underground, what happened to it when it left. They carried the transit downstairs, where morning light revealed its true craftsmanship. The instrument bore the maker's mark of a 1940s surveying company, and every brass fitting had been kept polished and calibrated. "Miss Sarah," Ellie appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her pajamas but wide awake with curiosity. "What's that pretty thing?" "It's called a transit, sweetheart," Sarah explained. "Your Uncle Samuel used it to measure the land and make very precise maps." Ellie approached the instrument with the careful reverence she showed all of Samuel's tools. "Did he look through it like a telescope?" "Something like that. Would you like to see how it works?" While Sarah showed Ellie the basics of the transit, Noah studied the field notebooks. Samuel's observations went back decades, recording seasonal changes in water flow, variations in mineral content, and detailed measurements of elevation and distance. It was the work of someone building an irrefutable scientific case. One entry, dated just 6 months before Samuel's death, caught Noah's attention. Water table dropped 3.2 feet from previous year. Drought conditions account for some variation, but extraction from neighboring properties increasing. Miller Farm sold to Agricultural Development Company last month. Suspect new irrigation wells drawing from same aquifer. Time running short to establish protection. Sarah noticed Noah's frown. He knew they were closing in. The development companies have been buying properties around here for 2 years, always claiming it's for agricultural use. But Samuel tracked the water levels and knew what was really happening. Industrial extraction. On a scale that would drain the aquifer within a decade. Sarah's voice carried the frustration of someone who'd watched good science be ignored. Samuel tried to interest the State Geological Survey, but political pressure kept killing any serious investigation. Noah's phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Mom wants to take Ellie shopping for school clothes this afternoon. Says it would be good for her to see what normal life looks like." The message stung, carrying the implication that life with Noah was somehow abnormal, but it also reminded him that he had less than 12 hours before the Whitmans expected his answer to their custody proposal. "Sarah, you said Samuel had a plan. What exactly did he want me to do?" She pulled out a manila folder that had been tucked inside the transit case. "Finish what he started. Complete the watershed protection application, document your stewardship of the property, and force a legal challenge that exposes what the development companies are really doing." The folder contained partially completed forms for the Kentucky Environmental Protection Cabinet, along with supporting documentation that represented years of careful research. Samuel had identified every legal precedent, every regulatory requirement, every procedural step necessary to have the aquifer designated as a protected water source. "But you'd have to prove you're serious about protection," Sarah continued. "Not just filing paperwork, but demonstrating actual stewardship. Sustainable practices, environmental monitoring, community benefit." Noah looked around the kitchen, with its water-stained walls and ancient appliances. "How am I supposed to prove stewardship when I can barely keep the roof from falling in?" By showing that you understand what's at stake, by making the improvements that matter most for water protection, not just cosmetic fixes, Sarah spread Samuel's maps on the table. "Look at this." She pointed to an area behind the house where Samuel had marked several springs. Natural recharge points. Right now they're contaminated by runoff from the old septic system and agricultural chemicals from the previous owner. Samuel designed a filtration system that would clean the recharge water and protect the aquifer. Designed it? Complete engineering plans. He was going to build it himself before he got sick. Sarah's finger traced lines on the map that showed a system of settling ponds, natural filters, and controlled drainage. It would cost maybe $5,000 in materials, but it would demonstrate real environmental protection. $5,000 might as well have been $50,000 given Noah's financial situation, but as he studied Samuel's careful plans, an idea began to form. These materials, gravel, sand, PVC pipe, concrete, I could source most of it locally, maybe even used. You're thinking like a carpenter. I am a carpenter, and carpenters know how to build things that work, even on tight budgets. Noah traced the filtration system's path. Samuel designed this, but I could build it. Properly built, it would last decades. Sarah's smile was the first genuinely hopeful expression he'd seen from her. If you could pull that off, complete the environmental protection while improving the property, it would completely change your legal position. They spent the next hour going through Samuel's engineering plans. The filtration system was elegant in its simplicity, using gravity flow and natural materials to clean water before it entered the aquifer. It was exactly the kind of project that played to Noah's strengths, practical construction that served a larger purpose. "There's one more thing," Sarah said, pulling out a letter from the bottom of the folder. Samuel was in contact with an environmental law firm in Lexington. They specialize in groundwater protection cases, and they work on contingency for clients who can demonstrate legitimate stewardship. The letter was from attorney Maria Santos, expressing interest in Samuel's case and offering to represent him if he decided to challenge corporate extraction rights. She'd included her card with a handwritten note, "Water belongs to the community, not the highest bidder." Noah felt something shift inside him, a sense of possibility that had been absent since the day he'd lost his construction job. This wasn't just about keeping Ellie with him anymore. It was about protecting something that mattered, something that could benefit generations of people if it fell into the right hands. "Sarah, if I do this, if I try to build Samuel's filtration system and complete the protection application, what are my real chances?" She was quiet for a long moment, studying the maps spread across the table. "Against the Whitman's money and the development company's lawyers? Honestly, I don't know. But I know what happens if you don't try. The aquifer gets sold to the highest bidder, the water disappears into corporate profits, and in 20 years this whole area becomes another place where communities died because their natural resources were strip-mined." Through the kitchen window, Noah watched Ellie exploring the yard, collecting rocks and arranging them in patterns that made sense only to her. She moved with the confidence of a child who felt safe and loved, who trusted that the adults in her life would protect what mattered most. That afternoon, while Ellie was in town with Jessica and the Whitmans, Noah and Sarah walked the property with Samuel's transit and field notebooks. Using the antique instrument, they verified Samuel's measurements and documented the current condition of the natural springs that fed the aquifer. "The contamination is worse than Samuel thought," Sarah observed, testing water samples from the main spring. "Agricultural runoff has increased the nitrate levels significantly, which makes the filtration system even more important." "Exactly. If you can demonstrate that you're actively improving water quality while the development companies are degrading it, you have a strong legal argument for stewardship rights." As they worked, Noah began to see the property through Samuel's eyes. This wasn't just a rundown farmhouse on neglected land. It was the keystone of an entire ecosystem, the point where surface water entered an underground river that could serve thousands of people. But it was also a battleground. The development companies had been positioning themselves for years, buying properties and establishing extraction rights. Samuel had been the obstacle they couldn't remove through purchase or pressure, so they'd waited for time to solve their problem. They hadn't counted on Noah. That evening, as Ellie told him about her day in town, "Grammy bought me 3 new dresses, but I told her I liked my old clothes better." Noah made his decision. He called the Whitman's attorney and left a message. "I'm declining your custody arrangement. Ellie stays with me." Then he called Maria Santos, the environmental lawyer, and left another message. "I'm Samuel Carter's nephew. I'd like to discuss finishing what he started." Finally, he sat down with Samuel's engineering plans and began making lists materials needed, suppliers to contact, work that could be done immediately versus projects that would take weeks. Building the filtration system wouldn't just improve the property, it would prove that Noah understood what he'd inherited and was willing to fight to protect it. The question was whether he could build it fast enough to matter. In the growing darkness, the old farmhouse settled around them with its familiar creaks and sighs. But tonight, those sounds seemed different to Noah. Not the groaning of a structure ready to collapse, but the whisper of something ancient and patient, waiting for the right person to unlock its secrets. Outside, the springs that fed the aquifer continued their eternal work, carrying clean water down through limestone and time toward an uncertain future. Tomorrow, Noah would begin the work of making sure that future served the people who needed it most. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a process server who looked apologetic as he handed Noah the legal documents. Inside were the official papers the Whitmans had promised. A petition for emergency custody based on unsafe living conditions and financial instability, accompanied by a court date just 2 weeks away. But tucked between the legal filings was something Noah hadn't expected. A second envelope containing what appeared to be a historical land deed, yellowed with age and bearing official seals from the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Noah spread the documents on Samuel's kitchen table, his hands trembling slightly as he realized what he was looking at. The deed, dated 1887, established not just property ownership, but something called perpetual water rights for the land that now included his farmhouse. "Sarah needs to see this," he muttered, reaching for his phone. She arrived within 20 minutes, bringing with her a magnifying glass and the kind of focused intensity Noah had learned to associate with important discoveries. Sarah examined the deed carefully, paying particular attention to the legal language and official stamps. "This changes everything," she said finally. "Noah, this document establishes water rights that predate modern extraction laws. It means your property has legal claim to the water that flows beneath it, regardless of who owns the surrounding land." "But how did it end up with the custody papers?" Sarah's expression darkened. "Someone wanted you to have it. Someone who knew the Whitman's attorney would file today and wanted to make sure you understood what you're really fighting for." The implication hung between them like smoke. Someone with access to legal filings and historical records had deliberately ensured Noah would see this deed at exactly the right moment. "Maria Santos," Noah said, understanding. The environmental lawyer Samuel contacted. His phone rang as if summoned by his words. The caller ID showed a Lexington number. "Mr. Carter, this is Maria Santos. I believe you received some interesting reading material this morning." Maria's voice carried the confidence of someone accustomed to complex legal battles. She explained that she'd been investigating the development company's land acquisitions and had discovered the historical deed in the county records office. "Your Uncle Samuel was right to be concerned," she said. 3 different corporations have been buying properties around your land, and they're all subsidiaries of the same parent company, Clearwater Development Group. They've done this before in other states, always following the same pattern, which is buy up properties around a water source, establish extraction rights, then pressure the key landowner to sell. If pressure doesn't work, they find legal ways to force a sale tax assessments, environmental violations, anything that makes ownership too expensive to maintain. Noah looked around the kitchen with its peeling wallpaper and ancient appliances. They don't need legal pressure, This place is falling apart on its own. That's exactly what they're counting on, Maria said. But the water rights deed changes the equation. If you can prove you're acting as a responsible steward of the water source, those historical rights give you significant legal protection. After the call ended, Sarah helped Noah understand the full implications of the deed. The 1,887 document didn't just establish water rights, it created what amounted to a conservation easement, requiring the landowner to protect the water source for the benefit of present and future generations. Samuel knew about this, Sarah said, tracing the deed's ornate legal language with her finger. He had to have known. That's why he was so meticulous about documenting sustainable practices, and why he left the property to me instead of selling it. Exactly. He needed someone who would honor the conservation requirement, not just cash out to the highest bidder. That afternoon brought unexpected visitors, not the Whitmans this time, but two men in expensive suits who introduced themselves as representatives of Clearwater Development Group. The older man, who gave his name as Charles Morrison, had the polished appearance of someone accustomed to making deals that left everyone happy, at least on the surface. "Mr. Carter, we understand you've inherited some challenging property," Morrison began, his tone sympathetic but businesslike. "We'd like to discuss how we might be able to help." They sat on Samuel's front porch, where the sagging boards creaked ominously under their weight. Morrison's companion, a younger man named Derek, took notes on a tablet while Morrison outlined their proposal. "Clearwater specializes in agricultural development," Morrison explained. "We help landowners maximize the value of underutilized property through sustainable farming practices and water management systems." "What kind of water management?" Noah asked. "Modern irrigation systems, primarily. We install wells and distribution networks that help farmers make the most of their water resources." Morrison gestured toward the overgrown fields behind the house. "Property like this could support a significant agricultural operation with the right infrastructure." Derek showed Noah photographs on his tablet, neat rows of crops, efficient irrigation systems, and what appeared to be profitable farming operations. It all looked impressive and professional. "We're prepared to offer you $200,000 for the property," Morrison said. "Cash with a 30-day closing. That would give you the resources to provide proper housing for your daughter and put this unfortunate situation behind you." $200,000. It was more money than Noah had ever imagined having, enough to buy a decent house in town and maybe start a small construction business. Enough to end the custody battle and give Ellie the stability everyone said she needed. "I'll need to think about it," Noah said. Morrison's smile remained friendly, but something harder flickered in his eyes. "Of course, but I should mention that our offer has a time limit. Market conditions change, and opportunities like this don't last indefinitely." After they left, Noah sat alone on the porch, staring at the business card Morrison had given him. $200,000 would solve all his immediate problems. It would also ensure that the aquifer Samuel had spent decades protecting would be drained within 10 years. When Ellie returned from school, she found her father in Samuel's workshop, studying the engineering plans for the water filtration system. She climbed onto a special stool and watched him work, her presence a quiet comfort in the gathering twilight. "Daddy, are we going to stay here forever? Would you like to?" Ellie considered the question with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. "I like it here. It feels like Uncle Samuel is still taking care of us, even though he's gone." That evening, Sarah returned with news that made Noah's decision even more complicated. She'd spent the afternoon researching Clearwater Development Group and their parent company, Aquatic Resources International. "They're not agricultural developers," she said, spreading printouts across the kitchen table. "They're water extraction specialists. They've drained aquifers in 3 other states, always using the same play: buy the land, pump the water, sell it to municipalities and bottling companies, then move on when the well runs dry." The documents Sarah had found painted a troubling picture. In Colorado, Clearwater had extracted so much water from an underground source that neighboring wells had gone dry. In Arizona, they'd left behind contaminated soil and legal battles that were still ongoing 5 years later. The $200,000 they offered? Sarah pointed to a financial report. They'll make that back in the first 6 months of operation. The aquifer under this property is worth at least $50 million to them, probably more. Noah thought about Morrison's friendly demeanor and Derek's professional presentation. They seem legitimate. They are legitimate in the sense that what they do is legal. But legal doesn't mean right. Sarah's voice carried the frustration of someone who'd watched corporate interests override community needs too many times. Noah, once they start extraction, there's no going back. The water will be gone, and communities like Cedar Falls will be left to find new sources or watch their towns die. That night, after Ellie had gone to bed, Noah walked the property with a flashlight, following the path of Samuel's Springs toward the main recharge area. The sound of flowing water was subtle but constant, a whisper that spoke of abundance and continuity. He thought about the water rights deed, about Samuel's decades of careful stewardship, about the engineering plans that could protect this resource for future generations. He also thought about the custody battle looming in less than 2 weeks, about his daughter's need for stability, about the practical reality of choosing between idealism and survival. At the main spring, Noah knelt and cupped the clear water in his hands. It was cool and clean, tasting of limestone and thyme. This was what Samuel had protected, what Clearwater wanted to own, what the community needed to survive. But it was also what stood between Noah and the resources he needed to keep his daughter. Standing in the darkness beside the spring that fed the aquifer, Noah understood that his next decision would determine not just his family's future, but the fate of water that had been flowing through this land since before humans walked the earth. The sound of the spring seemed to grow louder in the silence, as if the water itself was waiting to learn whether it would continue its ancient journey toward the community that depended on it, or disappear into corporate pipelines that would carry it toward distant profits. Tomorrow, Noah would have to choose which future he was willing to fight for. The manila envelope that arrived the next morning contained no return address, but its contents made Noah's hands shake as he spread the documents across Samuel's kitchen table. Environmental impact studies, dated just 3 months ago, showing the devastating effects of industrial water extraction on ecosystems throughout the region. The studies were official, bearing the seal of the Kentucky Environmental Protection Cabinet, but they'd been marked confidential and not for public release. Someone had taken considerable risk to ensure Noah saw them. Sarah arrived to find him poring over charts and graphs that painted a grim picture of corporate water extraction throughout Kentucky. Aquifers that had sustained communities for generations were being depleted at alarming rates, leaving behind contaminated soil and dried wells. "Where did these come from?" she asked, examining the official stamps and signatures. "I don't know, but look at this." Noah pointed to a study of a town called Millfield, about 60 miles southeast. Clearwater drained their aquifer in 18 months. The whole community had to relocate. The Millfield study included photographs that made Noah's stomach clench. Dried wells, cracked earth where springs had once flowed, and abandoned houses that spoke of a community that had simply ceased to exist when its water disappeared. "This is what they want to do here," Sarah said quietly. "Turn Cedar Falls into another Millfield." Noah's phone rang, Maria Santos calling with an update on the legal situation. "I've been digging into Clearwater's operations," she said without preamble. "They're moving faster than usual on this acquisition. My sources suggest they're under pressure from investors to show quick returns." "What kind of pressure?" "The kind that makes them willing to take legal risks they might normally avoid. I think we can use that to our advantage, but only if you're committed to fighting this through." Maria explained that environmental law offered several avenues for protecting the aquifer, but all of them required Noah to demonstrate active stewardship of the water source. The filtration system Samuel had designed would be a crucial piece of evidence, but it had to be built and operational before the custody hearing. 2 weeks isn't much time," Maria said. "Can you pull it off?" Noah looked at Samuel's engineering plans, mentally calculating materials and labor. I'll have to. After the call ended, Sarah revealed something she'd been holding back. Noah, there's something you should know about my connection to Samuel. We weren't just research partners, we were planning to get married. The admission hung in the kitchen air like morning mist. Sarah's eyes held a mixture of grief and determination that explained her fierce commitment to protecting Samuel's legacy. He proposed last spring, right after the doctor told him about the cancer, said he didn't have time for a long engagement. Her voice carried the weight of loss still fresh enough to ache. We were going to fight Clearwater together, turn this place into a model for sustainable water management. Sarah, I'm sorry, I didn't know. He chose you because he believed you'd finish what we started. Not because you were family, but because you're the kind of man who fights for what matters, even when the odds are impossible. That afternoon brought more visitors, but these were welcomed ones. Word had somehow spread through Cedar Falls about Noah's situation, and people began arriving with offers of help that surprised him with their generosity. Tom Henderson, who ran the local hardware store, showed up with a truck full of PVC pipe and fittings. Samuel Carter was a good man, he said simply. Heard you might need some materials for a water project. Jenny Martinez, who taught at the elementary school, brought a casserole and an offer to tutor Ellie if the custody battle dragged on. That little girl deserves to stay with her father, she said firmly. Even Bill Watson, who owned the feed store and had initially been skeptical of the city fellow who'd inherited Samuel's place, arrived with a load of gravel and sand. Samuel always said this land was special, he told Noah. Maybe it's time we found out why. By evening, Noah had enough donated materials to begin construction of the filtration system. More importantly, he had something he hadn't expected: community support from people who understood what was at stake. As neighbors worked together to unload supplies, Ellie moved among them with the easy confidence of a child who felt truly welcomed. She helped carry smaller items, asked questions about the filtration system, and charmed everyone with her earnest desire to help protect Uncle Samuel's special water. Look at her, Sarah said, watching Ellie explain the project to Mrs. Patterson from the post office. She understands what this means better than most adults. That night, after the volunteers had gone home and Ellie was asleep, Noah and Sarah sat in Samuel's workshop planning the construction sequence. The filtration system would require careful coordination excavation, pipe laying, concrete work, and the installation of natural filtering materials in precise layers. The settling pond is the key, Sarah explained, pointing to Samuel's drawings. It has to be positioned to catch runoff from the entire recharge area, but deep enough to allow proper filtration through the gravel beds. I can handle the construction, Noah said, but I'll need help with the technical aspects: flow rates, filtration depths, monitoring systems. Samuel left detailed specifications for everything. He even calculated seasonal variations in water flow and designed the system to handle peak loads during spring runoff. As they worked through the engineering details, Noah began to appreciate the full scope of his uncle's vision. This wasn't just a water filtration system, it was a comprehensive approach to watershed management that could serve as a model for sustainable development throughout the region. Sarah, if we pull this off, if we complete the system and win the legal battle, what happens then? She looked up from the plans, her expression thoughtful. Then we prove that communities can protect their natural resources without sacrificing economic development. We show that there's a better way than corporate extraction and environmental destruction. And Clearwater? They move on to easier targets. Companies like that don't fight battles they can't win quickly. Noah's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Saw your lights on. Working late on improvements? Remember our offer expires Friday. Don't let pride cost your daughter her future. The message was unsigned, but Noah had no doubt it came from Clearwater. The implied threat was clear: accept their offer or face the consequences of challenging corporate power. They're getting nervous, Sarah observed, reading over his shoulder. Good. Nervous corporations make mistakes. But Noah was thinking about the deadline. Friday was just 3 days away, and the custody hearing was the following Monday. If he refused Clearwater's offer and lost the court battle, he'd have nothing, no money for legal fees, no stable housing for Ellie, and no way to prevent the aquifer's destruction. Sarah, I need you to be honest with me. What are the real odds of winning the custody case? She was quiet for a long moment, studying Samuel's plans. Without the filtration system operational and the watershed protection filing complete, not good. The Whitmans have money, connections, and a house that doesn't leak when it rains. And with the system complete? With the system complete, you're not just a struggling single father anymore. You're an environmental steward protecting a vital natural resource. That changes the entire legal equation. Outside, the sound of Samuel's springs continued their eternal whisper, carrying clean water toward an uncertain future. Noah thought about his daughter sleeping upstairs, about the community members who'd offered their help, about the water that had flowed through this land for thousands of years before corporate extraction had become a threat. He also thought about the practical reality of construction timelines, legal deadlines, and the enormous risk of betting everything on a project he'd never attempted before. But as he looked at Samuel's careful engineering drawings, at the donated materials stacked in the yard, at Sarah's determined expression, Noah realized he'd already made his choice. The filtration system would be built, the watershed protection would be filed, and Clearwater Development Group would learn that some things weren't for sale at any price. The question was whether Noah could complete the work in time to save both the aquifer and his family. The letter was hidden behind a loose board in Samuel's bedroom wall, discovered only when Noah began repairs to fix a leak that had been dripping into Ellie's room below. Unlike the other documents he'd found, this one was sealed in waterproof plastic and marked with his name in Samuel's careful handwriting, along with specific instructions. Open only if Clearwater makes direct contact. Noah's hands trembled as he broke the seal. The letter was dated just 2 weeks before Samuel's death, when the old man would have been weak from chemotherapy, but apparently still sharp enough to anticipate exactly how events would unfold. "My dear Noah," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then Clearwater has shown their hand, and you're facing the choice I hoped you'd never have to make. By now you've discovered the water, met Sarah, and begun to understand what I've left you. But there's more to this story than you know, and you'll need the complete truth to make the decision that's right for your family." Noah sank into Samuel's reading chair, the letter shaking in his hands as he read his uncle's final revelation. "I wasn't just a hobbyist geologist, Noah. For 30 years, I worked for the U.S. Geological Survey, specializing in groundwater analysis and protection. I retired early when I realized how much political pressure was being applied to suppress research that interfered with corporate extraction rights. I came to this farm not to escape the work, but to continue it independently." The letter explained that Samuel had been conducting a covert study of corporate water extraction throughout the southeastern United States, documenting cases where companies had drained aquifers and left communities without sustainable water sources. His research had been funded by a consortium of environmental foundations, and his findings were meant to support federal legislation protecting groundwater resources. "The aquifer under this property isn't just valuable because of its size or purity," Samuel continued. "It's valuable because it's connected to a massive underground system that extends across 3 states. Clearwater doesn't just want to extract water from your land, they want to use it as the central pumping station for the largest water mining operation in U.S. history." Noah read the words twice before their full meaning penetrated. This wasn't about a local aquifer worth $50 million. This was about a regional water system worth billions, with his farmhouse sitting at the critical control point. "The water rights deed you found is real, but it's more powerful than you know. It doesn't just protect your property, it establishes your legal authority over the entire connected aquifer system. If you can prove responsible stewardship, you have the legal standing to challenge Clearwater's extraction rights on all the surrounding properties they've purchased." Sarah's knock at the front door interrupted Noah's reading. He found her standing on the porch with a grim expression and a manila folder that looked ominously official. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. "I've been monitoring Clearwater's permit applications, and they just filed for emergency extraction rights. They're claiming drought conditions require immediate access to groundwater reserves." Noah invited her in, his mind still reeling from Samuel's letter. "Sarah, there's something I need to show you." He handed her the letter, watching her expression change as she read Samuel's revelations. When she finished, she sank into the kitchen chair, her face pale. "He never told me about his USGS background," she said quietly. "I knew he was brilliant, but I thought he was self-taught. Did you know about the connected aquifer system?" "I suspected it from his maps, but I never realized the full scope." Sarah spread her own research materials on the table. "Noah, if Samuel's right about the regional connection, then stopping Clearwater here doesn't just protect Cedar Falls, it protects water supplies for hundreds of thousands of people." The phone rang, interrupting their discussion. The caller ID showed Maria Santos's number. "Noah, we have a serious problem," the environmental lawyer said without preamble. "Clearwater just filed an emergency petition claiming that delays in water extraction are threatening agricultural operations throughout the region. They're asking for immediate injunctive relief that would allow them to begin pumping while legal challenges are pending." "Can they do that?" "If they can prove immediate necessity, yes, and they've apparently found a sympathetic judge who's scheduled an emergency hearing for tomorrow morning." Noah felt the careful plans he'd been building collapse around him. "What does that mean for the custody case?" "It means Clearwater is trying to resolve the water issue before your custody hearing on Monday. If they get permission to start extraction, your stewardship argument becomes irrelevant. There won't be any water left to protect." After Maria hung up, Noah and Sarah sat in the kitchen's afternoon light, surrounded by the evidence of Samuel's decades-long investigation. The scope of what they faced had expanded beyond anything Noah had imagined when he'd first discovered the geological survey in the wall. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need complete honesty." She nodded, her expression serious. "Samuel's letter says you knew more about this than you've told me, about his real background, about the scope of the aquifer system, about what Clearwater is really planning." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her eyes focused on Samuel's maps. "I knew Samuel had professional training. His knowledge was too sophisticated for a hobbyist. But he swore me to secrecy about his USGS background because he was concerned about retaliation." "What kind of retaliation?" "The kind that happens to government scientists who challenge corporate interests. Career destruction, legal harassment, threats to family members." Sarah's voice carried the weight of experience. "Noah, environmental scientists who cross the wrong people sometimes have accidents or find themselves facing federal charges for violating classification protocols. So Samuel was hiding here. Samuel was fighting from here. This farm was never a retreat, it was a fortress." Sarah pulled out a map Noah hadn't seen before, one that showed corporate extraction operations across multiple states. He was building a legal case that would expose the entire industry's systematic destruction of groundwater resources. The map was overwhelming in its scope. Red marks indicated depleted aquifers, blue marks showed active extraction sites, and yellow marks represented planned operations. The pattern was clear, a methodical draining of underground water systems that had taken millennia to develop. "And now they want to make me part of it," Noah said. "They want to neutralize you. The $200,000 offer wasn't a biot, it was a bribe to make you go away quietly." Noah's phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. "Heard about tomorrow's hearing. Last chance to be reasonable. Think about your daughter's future." This time, the threat was explicit. Accept Clearwater's offer or face the consequences of challenging their emergency extraction petition with insufficient resources and legal support. "Sarah, if we fight this tomorrow and lose, what happens?" "Clearwater starts pumping immediately. The aquifer is depleted within 5 years, and communities throughout the region lose their water supplies." She met his eyes directly. "And you'll likely lose custody of Ellie because you'll be seen as someone who chose an environmental crusade over his daughter's welfare. And if we don't fight, You take their money, move away, and watch from a distance as they destroy everything Samuel spent his life protecting. That evening, after Ellie had gone to bed, Noah walked to the main spring where he'd first understood the scope of what he'd inherited. The water flowed as it had for thousands of years, clear and constant and seemingly eternal. But now he knew that eternity could end tomorrow if a judge decided that corporate profits outweighed environmental protection. He thought about his daughter sleeping upstairs, about the community members who donated materials for the filtration system, about the hundreds of thousands of people whose water supplies depended on the aquifer system beneath his feet. He also thought about Samuel's final letter, tucked safely in his pocket, and the weight of a 30-year investigation that had led to this moment. Standing beside the spring in the gathering darkness, Noah understood that tomorrow's hearing wasn't just about water rights or custody battles. It was about whether communities could protect their natural resources from corporate exploitation, or whether money and political influence would always prevail over environmental stewardship. The sound of flowing water seemed to grow louder in the silence, as if the aquifer itself was waiting to learn its fate. By morning, Noah would have to decide whether he was willing to risk everything, his daughter's custody, his financial security, his quiet life, to fight a battle that Samuel had spent decades preparing for. The water continued its ancient flow, carrying with it the hopes and fears of everyone whose future depended on its protection. Noah woke before dawn on Friday morning, his mind immediately focused on the emergency hearing scheduled for 10 o'clock. On his kitchen table lay Samuel's master blueprint for the sustainable water management system, not just the filtration project Noah had been planning, but a comprehensive design that could protect the entire regional aquifer while providing clean water to communities throughout the area. The blueprint was Samuel's masterpiece, combining 30 years of geological expertise with practical engineering solutions. It showed how the natural recharge points could be enhanced and protected, how extraction could be managed sustainably, and how the water system could serve as the foundation for long-term economic development that benefited communities rather than distant corporations. "It's brilliant," Sarah said, arriving with coffee and the kind of determined energy that comes from knowing you're facing the most important day of your life. "If we can get this in front of the right people, it changes everything. The question is whether we can convince Judge Harrison that there's an alternative to Clearwater's extraction plan." Maria Santos had called at 5:30 with updates on the legal strategy. The emergency hearing would focus on Clearwater's claim that immediate water extraction was necessary to prevent agricultural losses during drought conditions. Noah's team would have to prove that sustainable management could meet the same needs without depleting the aquifer. The judge is Thomas Harrisono, relation to the Whitman's attorney, Maria had explained. He's got a reputation for being thorough and fair, but he's also practical. He won't be impressed by environmental arguments that ignore economic realities. So we need to show him that sustainable management is also economically superior. Exactly, and we need to do it with evidence, not just good intentions. That was where Samuel's blueprint became crucial. The master plan didn't just protect water, it created a sustainable development model that could generate long-term revenue for the entire region while preserving the aquifer for future generations. As Sarah helped Noah prepare for the hearing, Ellie appeared in the kitchen, wearing her best dress and carrying her school backpack. "Daddy, Mrs. Martinez is picking me up early today because you have to go to the important meeting." Noah knelt to her level, his heart aching at the trust in her 8-year-old eyes. "That's right, sweetheart. Daddy has to go talk to a judge about Uncle Samuel's special water. Are you going to tell them why it's important to protect it?" "I'm going to try." Ellie hugged him fiercely. "Uncle Samuel knew you'd take good care of his water. I know it too." At 8 o'clock, Tom Henderson arrived with his pickup truck loaded with equipment that made Noah's pulse quicken. "Figured you might need some visual aids for your presentation," Tom said, unloading a portable water testing kit, samples from various springs on the property, and a working model of the filtration system that Samuel had apparently built in his workshop. Where did you find this? Your uncle showed it to me last spring. Said someday someone might need to demonstrate how natural filtration works better than industrial processing. Tom's weathered face was grim. Heard Clearwater's been making threats. Want you to know the whole town's behind you on this. Jenny Martinez arrived with Mrs. Patterson from the post office and Bill Watson from the feed store. We're coming to the hearing, Jenny announced. People need to hear from the community that would be affected by Clearwater's extraction plan. By 9 o'clock, a convoy of vehicles was heading toward the county courthouse, Noah and Sarah in his pickup, Maria Santos in her sedan, and a line of cars carrying what appeared to be half the population of Cedar Falls. Word had spread through the small community that this hearing would determine their water future, and people were determined to have their voices heard. The courthouse was a red brick building that had served Barton County for nearly a century. Its courtroom was designed for routine legal proceedings, not the crowd that packed its benches as interested citizens claimed every available seat. Judge Harrison was a man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of measured demeanor that suggested he'd heard every argument lawyers could devise. He called the hearing to order promptly at 10 o'clock, his eyes taking in the unusual crowd with obvious interest. This is an emergency petition for injunctive relief filed by Clearwater Development Group, he began. The petitioners claim that delays in accessing groundwater resources are causing immediate economic harm to agricultural operations in the region. Clearwater's lead attorney, a sharp-dressed woman named Catherine Bell, rose to present their case. She was everything Maria had warned Noah to expect: polished, confident, and armed with charts and studies that painted a picture of agricultural crisis requiring immediate intervention. Your Honor, drought conditions throughout the region have created emergency situations on multiple farms, Bell began. Our clients have invested significant resources in developing sustainable water extraction systems that can alleviate these conditions and prevent economic disaster for local agricultural communities. She presented a series of graphs showing declining rainfall, stressed crops, and economic projections that suggested massive agricultural losses if water access was delayed. The presentation was professional and persuasive, supported by testimony from farmers who claimed their operations were threatened by water shortages. The respondent, Mr. Carter, has no expertise in water management or agricultural development, Bell continued. His opposition to necessary water extraction appears to be based on misguided environmental concerns that ignore the immediate needs of working families whose livelihoods depend on agricultural production. Judge Harrison listened carefully, asking occasional questions about technical details and legal precedents. When Bell concluded her presentation, he turned to Maria Santos. Miss Santos, I understand you represent Mr. Carter's interests in this matter. What evidence do you present to dispute the petitioner's claims of emergency necessity? Maria rose, with the calm confidence of someone who'd been preparing for this moment since Samuel first contacted her office. Your Honor, we dispute not the existence of water needs in the region, but the claim that industrial extraction is the appropriate solution. She began by presenting Samuel's geological research, using the working model Tom Henderson had provided to demonstrate how the aquifer system actually functioned. The courtroom was quiet as she explained the difference between sustainable water management and industrial extraction. The petitioners want to remove water faster than it can be naturally replenished, Maria explained. Their own environmental impact studies, which they've attempted to keep confidential, show that their extraction methods will deplete the aquifer within 7 years. Bell objected, claiming the impact studies were proprietary information, but Judge Harrison overruled her. This is a hearing about environmental protection, Counselor. Environmental impact evidence is certainly relevant. Maria then called Sarah to testify about the aquifer's regional significance. Sarah's presentation was masterful, combining scientific expertise with clear explanations that made complex geology understandable to everyone in the courtroom. This isn't just about one farm or one community, Sarah explained. The aquifer system extends across 3 counties and provides base flow for dozens of streams and rivers. Industrial extraction at the scale Clearwater proposes would affect water supplies for hundreds of thousands of people. But the truly dramatic moment came when Maria called Noah to testify about Samuel's master blueprint. Noah walked to the witness stand carrying the rolled plans that represented his uncle's life work, his hands steady despite the weight of what he was about to reveal. "Mr. Carter," Maria began, "would you please tell the court about your uncle's background and expertise in water management?" Noah unrolled Samuel's blueprint on the courtroom table, its intricate details visible to everyone present. "My uncle Samuel Carter was a professional geologist with the U.S. Geological Survey for 30 years. He specialized in groundwater protection and sustainable water management systems." The courtroom erupted in surprised murmurs. Bell rose to object, but Judge Harrison waved her down. "I'd like to hear this testimony, Counselor." Noah explained Samuel's decades-long study of the regional aquifer system, his documentation of corporate extraction damage throughout the Southeast, and his development of sustainable management alternatives that could meet water needs without environmental destruction. "Your Honor," Noah concluded, "my uncle spent his final years developing a water management system that would serve this region's needs for generations. What Clearwater proposes would meet short-term demand by destroying long-term supply." Bell's cross-examination was aggressive, focusing on Noah's lack of formal training in geology or water management. But her attack seemed to backfire as community members in the courtroom became visibly angry at her dismissive attitude toward local concerns. The hearing's climax came when Maria presented Samuel's final piece of evidence, a letter from Dr. Marcus Webb of the Kentucky Geological Survey, confirming Samuel's professional credentials and endorsing his sustainable management plan. Mr. Carter's uncle was one of the most respected groundwater specialists in the country. Dr. Webb's letter stated, "His analysis of the regional aquifer system is scientifically sound, and his management recommendations represent the gold standard for sustainable water resource protection." Judge Harrison called a recess to review the evidence. During the break, Noah found himself surrounded by community members who wanted to express their support. Tom Henderson shook his hand firmly. "Your uncle would be proud," he said simply. But Noah's attention was focused on Belle, who was speaking urgently into her cell phone near the courthouse steps. Her expression suggested the hearing wasn't going as Clearwater had expected. When court reconvened, Judge Harrison's expression was thoughtful but determined. "This court has reviewed the evidence presented by both parties. The petition for emergency injunctive relief raises important questions about balancing immediate economic needs with long-term environmental protection." Noah held his breath, aware that the next words would determine not just the fate of the aquifer, but his ability to protect his daughter and honor his uncle's legacy. The courtroom was absolutely silent as Judge Harrison prepared to render his decision on whether corporate extraction or community stewardship would control the water that flowed beneath their feet. Judge Harrison adjusted his glasses and looked directly at Noah before speaking. "Mr. Carter, I've been on this bench for 22 years, and I've rarely seen a case where the stakes were so clearly defined. The question before this court is not simply whether Clearwater Development Group should be granted emergency extraction rights. The question is whether this community's water future should be determined by short-term corporate interests or long-term sustainable stewardship." Noah felt Sarah's hand squeeze his arm as the judge continued. "The evidence presented today reveals that Mr. Samuel Carter was not merely an amateur geologist, but a distinguished professional whose expertise in groundwater management was recognized at the federal level. His sustainable water management plan represents a scientifically sound alternative to industrial extraction." Belle rose from her seat. "Your Honor, with respect, Mr. Samuel Carter is deceased, and his nephew lacks the qualifications to implement such a complex system." "Ms. Belle," Judge Harrison interrupted, his voice carrying quiet authority, "you will have an opportunity to respond. Please be seated." The judge turned his attention to a document that Noah recognized as the original water rights deed from 1887. More significantly, this court has reviewed historical documentation establishing that the Carter property holds perpetual water rights that predate modern extraction laws. These rights carry with them both privileges and responsibilities. Noah's heart pounded as he realized what the judge was building toward. The 1887 deed explicitly requires the landowner to act as steward of the water resource for the benefit of present and future generations. This is not merely a property right. It is a conservation trust that has legal standing in environmental protection law. Catherine Bell's face had gone pale. The historical deed was apparently news to Clearwater's legal team, despite their months of preparation. Judge Harrison continued. Furthermore, the court notes that Clearwater Development Group has failed to disclose the full scope of their extraction plans. Internal documents submitted as evidence show that their operations would deplete the aquifer within 7 years, leaving communities throughout the region without sustainable water sources. He paused, looking out at the packed courtroom where farmers, shopkeepers, and families sat, waiting to learn their water future. However, this court also recognizes that legitimate agricultural water needs exist throughout the region. Drought conditions are real, and farmers require reliable water access to maintain their operations. Noah felt his stomach drop. The judge was preparing to split the difference, potentially granting Clearwater limited extraction rights while requiring environmental protections. Therefore, Judge Harrison said, this court denies Clearwater Development Group's petition for emergency extraction rights as currently proposed. The courtroom erupted in cheers and applause. Tom Henderson let out a whoop of joy, and Jenny Martinez hugged Mrs. Patterson with tears in her eyes. But Judge Harrison wasn't finished. However, he continued, raising his voice over the celebration, this court also establishes the following conditions. The room fell silent again. Mr. Carter, your water rights come with corresponding responsibilities. This court is ordering the immediate implementation of your uncle's sustainable water management system, with construction to begin within 30 days and completion within 6 months. Noah's mind raced. Implementing Samuel's full system would require resources far beyond what the community had donated for the basic filtration project. Furthermore, the judge continued, you will work with agricultural representatives to ensure that legitimate water needs are met through sustainable extraction methods that do not exceed the aquifer's natural replenishment rate. Catherine Bell rose again. Your Honor, my clients have invested significant resources in developing extraction infrastructure. This ruling effectively destroys their investment without compensation. Ms. Bell, your clients invested in extraction rights they did not legally possess, Judge Harrison replied sharply. The Carter water rights predate your client's land purchases and take legal precedence. If Clearwater wishes to participate in sustainable water management under Mr. Carter's stewardship, they are free to negotiate appropriate agreements. The implications hit Noah like a physical blow. The judge wasn't just protecting the aquifer, was making Noah responsible for managing water resources for the entire region. It was exactly what Samuel had envisioned, but the scope of responsibility was overwhelming. Your Honor, Maria Santos rose. My client appreciates the court's confidence, but implementing a regional water management system requires significant technical and financial resources, which is why this court is also ordering the establishment of a regional water stewardship authority, with Mr. Carter as the designated steward and the authority to levy reasonable fees on water users to fund system maintenance and environmental protection. Noah felt the world shift around him. The judge was creating a legal framework that would give him control over the regional water system while providing the resources necessary to manage it responsibly. But Bell wasn't finished fighting. Your Honor, this ruling grants unprecedented authority to an individual with no training in water management or regional planning. The economic implications. Ms. Bell, Your client's own environmental impact studies demonstrate the economic implications of uncontrolled extraction. Communities throughout the region would face water shortages within a decade under Clearwater's plan. This court finds that Mr. Carter's stewardship, guided by his uncle's professional expertise and supported by qualified technical advisors, serves the greater public interest. Judge Harrison leaned forward, his expression serious. Mr. Carter, this court is placing enormous responsibility on your shoulders. You will be accountable not just to this community, but to everyone whose water security depends on the aquifer system your property controls. Do you understand the magnitude of what this court is requiring? Noah stood slowly, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes watching him. He thought about Samuel's decades of careful research, about the community members who had donated materials and labor, about his daughter's future and the future of every family whose water flowed through the aquifer beneath his feet. Yes, Your Honor, I understand. And do you accept this responsibility? Noah looked back at Sarah, whose expression showed both pride and concern. He thought about the letter Samuel had left him, about the trust his uncle had placed in the Carter stubbornness to see this fight through to its conclusion. I accept, Your Honor. Judge Harrison nodded. Then this court's ruling is as follows. Clearwater Development Group's petition for emergency extraction rights is denied. Mr. Noah Carter is appointed as Regional Water Steward under the authority of the 1887 Water Rights Deed, with responsibility for implementing sustainable water management throughout the aquifer system. The Regional Water Stewardship Authority is hereby established with the power to regulate water extraction, fund environmental protection, and ensure equitable access to water resources. He banged his gavel. Court is adjourned. As the courtroom exploded in celebration and confusion, Noah remained standing at the defense table, trying to process what had just happened. He'd won a complete victory over Clearwater's extraction plans, but he'd also accepted responsibility for managing water resources for hundreds of thousands of people. Belle approached the table, her expression professional but strained. Mr. Carter, my clients will be appealing this decision. You should know that they don't give up easily. Neither do I, Noah replied. After she left, Maria Santos gathered her papers with the satisfied expression of a lawyer who'd just achieved something unprecedented. Noah, what Judge Harrison did today, creating a regional authority based on historical water rights, it's going to become a model for groundwater protection nationwide. If I can actually pull it off. You can. Samuel spent 30 years preparing for this moment, and you have an entire community ready to help. Maria's smile was confident. Besides, you just proved that one determined person with the right knowledge can defeat corporate power when the law is on their side. As Noah walked out of the courthouse into the Friday afternoon sunshine, he was surrounded by community members who wanted to shake his hand and express their gratitude. But his mind was already racing ahead to the practical challenges of implementing Samuel's water management system on a regional scale. He had 6 months to build infrastructure that would serve multiple communities, establish sustainable extraction protocols, and create a funding mechanism that would make the whole system financially viable. Most importantly, he had a custody hearing on Monday where he'd have to convince a different judge that his new responsibilities as regional water steward made him a suitable parent for 8-year-old Ellie. The battle for the water was won, but the war for his family was just beginning. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made everything seem possible, but Noah's confidence from Friday's victory had been replaced by a different kind of nervousness. The custody hearing would be held in the same courthouse where he'd defeated Clearwater, but family court operated by different rules and different priorities. Judge Patricia Morse was known for her no-nonsense approach to custody cases and her unwavering focus on children's best interests. Noah sat at the defendant's table with Maria Santos, watching as the Whitmans entered with their attorney Harrison and an arsenal of photographs, financial documents, and expert testimony designed to prove that 8-year-old Ellie would be better off in their custody. Remember, Maria whispered, everything changed on Friday. You're not just a struggling single father anymore. You're the regional water steward with legal authority over a multi-million-dollar natural resource. But Noah knew that impressive titles meant nothing if he couldn't demonstrate that his new responsibilities would benefit rather than burden his daughter. Margaret Whitman took the witness stand first, her testimony delivered with the polished confidence of someone accustomed to getting her way. She described Ellie's living conditions at the farmhouse with clinical precision: the leaking roof, the unreliable heating system, the isolation from proper educational and cultural opportunities. "Your Honor," Margaret said, her voice carrying genuine emotion, "we love our granddaughter dearly. We simply want what's best for her. Living in that deteriorating farmhouse, hours from decent schools and medical care, cannot serve Ellie's long-term interests." Attorney Harrison followed with a methodical presentation of Noah's financial struggles, his employment instability, and the farmhouse's numerous safety hazards. The photographs were devastating images of rotted porch boards, exposed electrical wiring, and rooms that looked more like construction sites than living spaces. The respondent has taken on enormous responsibilities as regional water steward, Harrison argued. These duties will require extensive travel, complex negotiations with government agencies, and management of a multi-million-dollar infrastructure project. How can he possibly provide the stable, focused parenting that Ellie needs? It was a sophisticated argument that turned Noah's legal victory into evidence of his unsuitability as a parent. The more successful he became at protecting the aquifer, the less time and energy he'd have for raising his daughter. When Maria called Noah to testify, he walked to the witness stand carrying a folder that contained not legal documents, but something more personal: photographs of Ellie exploring Samuel's workshop, helping with the water filtration project, and playing in the yard where she'd discovered dozens of geological specimens. "Mr. Carter," Maria began, "please tell the court about your daughter's adjustment to life at the farmhouse." Noah looked out at the courtroom, where he was surprised to see several familiar faces from Friday's hearing. Tom Henderson sat in the back row, along with Jenny Martinez and other community members, who'd apparently come to support him. "Ellie loves it there," Noah said simply. "She's found a sense of belonging that she never had in our apartment in Louisville. She knows every rock in Uncle Samuel's collection. She's learned the names of birds and wildflowers, and she talks about the water project like it's the most important thing in the world. But isn't it true that your new responsibilities will require significant time away from home? The Regional Water Stewardship Authority will require careful management, but most of the work can be done from the farmhouse. Samuel designed it as a working research station, and I'm continuing that tradition." Noah opened his folder and showed photographs of the workshop where he and Ellie spent their evenings. "My daughter isn't being separated from my work, she's becoming part of it." Harrison's cross-examination was predictably aggressive, focusing on Noah's lack of formal education in water management and the financial uncertainty that came with managing a newly created authority. "Mr. Carter, you've never managed a budget larger than a construction project, yet you're now responsible for millions of dollars in public resources. Don't you think that's a rather steep learning curve for someone trying to raise a young child?" "I think it's exactly the kind of challenge that teaches children about responsibility and service to community," Noah replied. "Ellie is learning that sometimes we inherit things that are bigger than ourselves, and we have a duty to protect them for future generations." But the hearing's turning point came when Maria called an unexpected witness, Ellie herself. Judge Morse looked concerned. "Ms. Santos, the child is only 8 years old. Are you certain this is appropriate?" "Your Honor, Ellie has specifically requested to speak about where she wants to live. Given her maturity and the unique circumstances of this case, I believe her voice should be heard." Ellie walked to the witness stand wearing the same dress she'd worn to Friday's hearing, her small hands folded carefully in her lap. Judge Morse leaned forward with the gentle expression she reserved for child witnesses. "Ellie, do you understand why we're here today?" "Yes, ma'am. You're deciding if I should live with Daddy or with Grammy and Grandpa. And do you have feelings about that?" Ellie's voice was clear and certain. I want to live with Daddy at Uncle Samuel's house. It's our home now. Margaret Whitman's attorney tried to intervene, suggesting that an 8-year-old couldn't understand the complexity of the decision, but Judge Morse waved him quiet. Ellie, can you tell me why you want to stay at the farmhouse? Because Daddy needs me to help take care of Uncle Samuel's special water, and because it's where I belong. Ellie looked directly at her grandparents, her expression sympathetic but firm. Grammy and Grandpa have a beautiful house, but it's not my house. The farmhouse is where Daddy and I are building something important together. What kind of important thing? We're protecting water so that lots of people can have clean drinking water forever and ever. Uncle Samuel started the work, but now it's Daddy's job, and someday it might be my job too. Judge Morse was quiet for a moment, studying the earnest 8-year-old who spoke about water stewardship with the seriousness most children reserved for favorite toys. Ellie, are you happy living at the farmhouse? Very happy. Daddy and I have adventures every day, and Miss Sarah teaches me about rocks and water and how to take care of the land. I'm learning things I could never learn anywhere else. After Ellie's testimony, the courtroom atmosphere had shifted noticeably. Even Harrison seemed to realize that his arguments about stability and educational opportunities had been undermined by a child who articulated her own needs with remarkable clarity. Judge Morse called a brief recess, during which Noah found himself surrounded by community supporters. Tom Henderson shook his hand. That little girl of yours has more sense than most adults I know. When court reconvened, Judge Morse's expression was thoughtful but decisive. This court has considered all testimony and evidence presented regarding the custody of Ellie Carter. The petitioners have raised legitimate concerns about the physical condition of the respondent's home and the demands of his new professional responsibilities. Noah felt his stomach tighten, but the judge continued. However, this court finds that the respondent has demonstrated not just the ability to provide for his daughter's physical needs, but something more valuable, the opportunity for her to grow up as part of something meaningful and important. Margaret Whitman's face went pale. The child's own testimony reveals a level of maturity and understanding that suggests she is thriving in her current environment. She is not being neglected or endangered. She is being raised to understand responsibility, community service, and environmental stewardship. Judge Morse looked directly at Noah. Mr. Carter, this court is granting you continued custody of your daughter with the following conditions. You will complete necessary safety repairs to the farmhouse within 60 days. You will ensure that Ellie's educational needs are met through enrollment in the Cedar Falls Elementary School, and you will provide regular reports to this court regarding her welfare and adjustment. The courtroom erupted in quiet celebration. Sarah reached over and squeezed Noah's hand, her eyes bright with tears of relief. Furthermore, Judge Morse continued, this court notes that Mr. Carter's appointment as regional water steward represents exactly the kind of stable, meaningful employment that serves children's long-term interests. Ellie will grow up understanding that her father's work serves the greater good, which is a lesson more valuable than private school or swimming pools. Harrison rose to object, but Judge Morse cut him off. Counselor, your clients are welcome to maintain their relationship with their granddaughter through regular visitation, but custody will remain with her father. As the hearing concluded, Noah felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he'd been carrying since the day the inheritance letter first arrived. He'd not only kept his daughter, but proven that the life they were building together at the farmhouse was exactly what she needed. Margaret and Robert Whitman approached him as the courtroom emptied, their expressions a mixture of disappointment and resignation. Noah, Margaret said quietly, we still think Ellie deserves better than that old farmhouse. She deserves to grow up knowing that her father fights for what matters, Noah replied. I think she's getting exactly what she deserves. As they walked out of the courthouse into the October afternoon, Ellie slipped her hand into Noah's and looked up at him with a smile that made everything worth fighting for. Daddy, can we go home now? I want to check on Uncle Samuel's springs and make sure they're still flowing right. Noah looked down at his daughter, this remarkable little girl who understood water stewardship better than most adults, and realized that they'd won something more valuable than any legal victory. They'd won the right to build a future together. 1 year later, Noah stood beside the completed community well that marked the heart of Samuel's sustainable water management system. The October morning was crisp and clear, perfect for the dedication ceremony that would officially launch the Regional Water Stewardship Authority as a model for environmental protection throughout the Southeast. The farmhouse behind him bore little resemblance to the sagging structure he'd inherited. The roof was solid, the foundation reinforced, and the wraparound porch restored to its original strength and beauty. But the most important changes were invisible: the network of monitoring wells, filtration systems, and distribution pipes that turned Samuel's vision into reality. "Daddy, they're ready for your speech," Ellie called from the crowd that had gathered for the ceremony. At 9 years old, she moved through the assembled visitors with the confidence of someone who understood her role as the next generation of water stewards. Her school project on aquifer management had won the state science fair, and she spoke about sustainable development with the authority of someone who'd watched it happen in her own backyard. Sarah approached with a clipboard full of technical reports that documented the system's first year of operation. As Noah's deputy and the authority's chief hydrologist, she'd managed the complex coordination between government agencies, environmental groups, and local communities that made regional water management possible. "The numbers are better than Samuel projected," she told Noah, her professional satisfaction evident. "Water quality has improved by 30% since we eliminated industrial extraction, and the aquifer's recharge rate has stabilized at sustainable levels." Noah reviewed the reports, still amazed by what they'd accomplished in 12 months. The authority now managed water resources for 6 counties, providing clean water to over 200 people, while generating enough revenue to fund ongoing environmental protection and community development projects. "Any word from Clearwater?" Noah asked. Sarah's smile was sharp with satisfaction. "They've moved their operations to Texas, where they're facing the same kind of legal challenges we mounted here. Turns out communities throughout the region are using our model to fight corporate water extraction." The dedication ceremony began with remarks from Governor Patricia Mills, who praised the Regional Water Stewardship Authority as a breakthrough in community-controlled environmental protection. Federal officials spoke about using the Kentucky model to guide national groundwater policy, and environmental lawyers from 6 states attended to study the legal framework Maria Santos had established. But Noah's attention was focused on the community members who'd made the project possible. Tom Henderson had expanded his hardware store to supply materials for water system maintenance throughout the region. Jenny Martinez had developed environmental education programs that brought students from across Kentucky to study sustainable water management. Even Bill Watson from the feed store had found new purpose as the authority's community liaison, helping other rural areas understand the benefits of local resource control. When Noah rose to speak, he looked out at faces that had become familiar over the past year: scientists and farmers, government officials and school children, environmental activists and business leaders who'd learned that protecting natural resources could also support economic development. "A year ago, my daughter and I arrived at a farmhouse that everyone said was worthless," Noah began. "We were broke, desperate, and facing a custody battle that could have separated our family forever. What we found instead was a community that understood the difference between price and value." He paused, looking at Ellie, who stood beside Sarah with the kind of pride that comes from watching your father do something important. "Samuel Carter spent 30 years studying the water that flows beneath our feet. He understood that natural resources don't belong to whoever can extract them fastest or sell them for the highest price. They belong to the communities that depend on them, and to the generations who'll inherit what we leave behind." Noah gestured toward the well system that now served as the centerpiece of a regional network. "This isn't just about water. It's about proving that communities can take control of their own futures, that environmental protection and economic development can work together, and that sometimes the most important battles are fought not in corporate boardrooms, but in the places where people actually live. The ceremony concluded with the traditional ribbon cutting, but Noah noticed that Ellie had brought her own pair of scissors. When he asked her why, she grinned with the mischief that reminded him of her mother at her best. "Because you said this belongs to my generation too, Daddy. I want to help start it." That afternoon, after the officials had departed and the crowds had dispersed, Noah and Ellie walked the property boundaries that Samuel had mapped so carefully decades earlier. The springs still flowed as they had for millennia, but now their water served communities throughout the region while remaining protected for future generations. "Do you think Uncle Samuel would be happy with what we did?" Ellie asked, collecting samples from the main spring for the monitoring program she'd designed as part of her advanced science studies. "I think he'd be amazed," Noah replied. "He hoped someone would protect the water. He never imagined they'd turn it into a model for the whole country." They paused at Samuel's grave, which Sarah had marked with a simple stone that read, "Samuel Carter, 1950 to 2024. He understood that water belongs to tomorrow." Ellie placed a bouquet of wildflowers beside the marker, a weekly ritual that had become her way of staying connected to the uncle she'd never met, but whose legacy shaped her daily life. "Daddy, when I grow up, will I be the regional water steward?" Noah considered the question seriously. Ellie's understanding of hydrology and environmental science already exceeded that of most adults, and her natural leadership skills suggested she'd inherited more than just the Carter stubbornness. "That depends on what you want to do with your life, sweetheart. The authority will need good leadership for generations to come, but it will also need scientists, engineers, educators, and community organizers. You could serve in any of those roles." "I want to do what you do," she said with the certainty that made her opinions impossible to dismiss. "Help communities protect their water and build things that will last forever." As they walked back toward the farmhouse in the gathering dusk, Noah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The desperate single father who'd arrived with nothing but an inheritance letter and a determination to keep his daughter had become the architect of a regional environmental protection system that served as a national model. But more importantly, he'd given Ellie something money couldn't buy, the knowledge that her father had fought for something bigger than personal gain, and the understanding that her own future was connected to the welfare of her community and the protection of the natural world. Sarah was waiting on the porch with dinner and the kind of contented expression that came from work that mattered. She'd moved into the farmhouse 6 months earlier, not just as Noah's partner in the water authority, but as his partner in building the life Samuel had envisioned for this place. "How did the samples look?" she asked Ellie, who immediately launched into a detailed report on mineral content, pH levels, and seasonal variations that would have impressed a graduate student in environmental science. As they sat down to dinner, Noah looked around the kitchen where he'd first discovered the geological survey that had changed everything. The water-stained walls had been repaired, the ancient appliances replaced, but Samuel's rock collection still occupied the mantelpiece, and his field notebooks remained on the shelf where serious research belonged. Outside, the sound of spring water flowing toward the community wells provided a constant reminder of why they were there and what they were protecting. It was the sound of abundance preserved, of resources managed wisely, of a future where clean water would still flow long after everyone in this room had become part of the earth that filtered and protected it. Noah raised his glass of water clean, pure water that had traveled through limestone and time to reach this table, and smiled at the people who'd helped him understand that some inheritances are too valuable to squander. "To Samuel," he said, "who taught us that the best treasures are the ones we protect for tomorrow." As they touched glasses in the farmhouse kitchen, the springs outside continued their eternal work, carrying clean water toward communities that had learned to value stewardship over extraction, sustainability over short-term profit, and the kind of wealth that could never be depleted because it grew stronger with each generation that understood its true worth. The old farmhouse settled around them with its familiar evening sounds, but tonight those creaks and sighs spoke not of decay, but of a structure strong enough to support the dreams of everyone who called it home.